Henrietta, our daughter-in-law, loudly said that elderly folks like us, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party. We were shocked by her audacity and couldn't find words to respond. I had kept silent for our eldest son Warren's sake. But Henrietta's disrespectful attitude reached my limit. My husband Reagan and I exchanged glances, nodded in agreement, and told Henrietta that we understood. Satisfied, she smiled and went back to Warren. I am Bridget, 73 years old, and Warren is our son with Reagan. Warren was always quiet but started to assert himself in college. He introduced us to the woman he was seriously dating, and we happily consented to their marriage. Around 3 years into their marriage, during Christmas, Warren and his wife were coming home for the first time. I was excited to spend time with Henrietta. When they arrived, Henrietta initially seemed shy but gradually relaxed. As it got dark, I stood up to prepare dinner, and Henrietta offered to help in the kitchen. While we were in the kitchen, an unfamiliar voice, lower and harsher than usual, said, "It's cold. This house is too cold." I turned towards Henrietta in disbelief, and she was rubbing her hands together with discontent. In an unhappy tone, she expressed her dislike for old houses and complained about Warren insisting they come. Stunned, I was speechless as Henrietta vented her bad mood at me. She even made a disparaging comment, suggesting my appearance was all an act to get married. "I'm tired of waiting. Hurry up and get ready." "I'm hungry," said Henrietta, seemingly annoyed by my stunned silence. She gestured towards the stove and spoke dismissively. I hurried to obey, probably more shaken than I realized. Once I started moving, Henrietta did nothing but dictate, not lifting a finger to help. She complained about everything, criticized my methods, yet did nothing herself. By the time the preparations were done, and it was just a matter of serving the food, Henrietta suddenly became active, charming Reagan and Warren, and blushing at their praise. It was then I finally understood this was Henrietta's true nature. 10 years later, Warren and his wife were returning for a visit. Henrietta had shown her true colors many times, but only in my presence. She never behaved that way in front of Reagan or Warren. I had kept silent, thinking it might be a misunderstanding, but the same things happened every time they visited, confirming my suspicions. Hearing they were coming back, I felt a bit downhearted. While planning to avoid being alone with Henrietta as much as possible, the doorbell rang. Sighing, I opened the door to find Warren standing alone. Surprised not to see Henrietta, I involuntarily looked around for her. Warren, noticing my reaction, spoke with a hint of apology. "Sorry, Mom. Henrietta had some urgent work and will join us later. She said it's okay to go ahead with the grave visit without her." It seemed Henrietta wouldn't be joining until her work was finished, and I felt a sense of relief at the thought of not having to witness Henrietta's behavior, even for a little while. I welcomed Warren into the house, and Reagan, who was in the living room, noticed Henrietta's absence and asked about her. While preparing tea, I found myself sighing deeply without realizing it. We decided to relax for the day and postponed the grave visit to the next day. When Warren informed Henrietta, she responded, "Understood, but I still can't finish my work and come over, so please apologize to the others for me." Reagan laughed it off as unavoidable, but I couldn't help feeling that Henrietta just didn't want to attend the grave visit. However, I couldn't voice such thoughts, so I just said not to worry about it, and we spent the day uneventfully. The next day, after finishing visiting the grave and relaxing at home, Henrietta called, saying, "Finally finished with work, so I'll be heading over tonight." The timing of her call right after the grave visit seemed a bit off to Reagan and Warren too, hastening my suspicion. That evening, just as we were about to have dinner, Henrietta arrived. She appeared a bit sweaty and out of breath, as if she had rushed. I frowned involuntarily, but Reagan and Warren were so pleased to see her that I decided not to say anything. Henrietta, having been freed from work, was told to take a shower first while dinner was being prepared. She replied somewhat apologetically. When she emerged for the bathroom at dinner time, she muttered upon seeing the food on the tray, "Sandwiches, that's it? After a hot day at the grave, I'm tired of eating this." I managed to avoid going to someone else's grave in this heat, and all I get is a simple meal. Henrietta tied up her hair and walked towards the living room. I felt angry but couldn't find the words to confront her. In the living room, she instantly started chatting happily with Regan, leaving me silently frustrated. Another 10 years passed, and Warren decided to move from his apartment to a house. After discussing it with Henrietta, they decided to pay as much down payment as possible themselves, but asked us for a little help with the shortfall. We couldn't refuse our dear Warren's request, so we immediately agreed and transferred the needed amount. Soon after, Warren informed us that their new house was built, and they planned the housewarming party with both families. I hadn't seen Henrietta's parents since the wedding, so I eagerly agreed to attend, considering everything that had happened. Warren was delighted with my response and immediately shared the news with Henrietta, who I imagined was on the other end of the phone. Thus, we were set to attend the housewarming party next month. A few days after this was decided, Henrietta unexpectedly visited alone. I was surprised by her unannounced visit and opened the door without realizing it was her. Looking up, I saw Henrietta with an unhappy expression, and I was taken aback. "I'll come in." Henrietta quickly checked for keys in the entrance and pushed past me to enter the house. Her arrogant behavior continued as she walked into the living room, probably because she noticed that Regan's keys weren't in the entrance. Indeed, Regan was out for his daily walk and wouldn't be back for a while. Taking advantage of this, Henrietta had barged into our home. Feeling trapped, I followed her into the living room where she waited for me without sitting down. Before I could even close the door, Henrietta glared at me and said, "Bridget, you're planning to come to the housewarming party. It's a nuisance, so can you please not come?" Surprised, I responded, "What are you suddenly talking about? Regan wasn't there, so Henrietta," crossing her arms, started speaking in a high-handed manner. "You're planning to tattle to my parents about me, aren't you?" Henrietta glared at me with evident disgust, clearly not wanting her parents to know about her behavior. She must have specifically chosen a time when Warren was working, and she had a day off, knowing about Regan's routine walk, and had timed her visit accordingly. Henrietta was cunning indeed. Calmly, I replied, "I had no such intention, but now that you mention it, it might not be a bad idea." Henrietta frowned in annoyance, saying, "It's no joke. I married Warren because he's good-looking and earns decently. I don't want to deal with annoying relatives revealing." Henrietta's expression froze when she realized I had caught on to the true reason for marrying Warren. As I worried about her strange behavior, the living room door opened behind me. Turning around, I saw Regan, who looked surprised as he gazed at Henrietta, realizing that her conversation with me had been overheard. Henrietta clicked her tongue but decided to brazen it out, telling us the real reason. "Elderly folks like you, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party." We were astounded by her audacity, at a loss for words. I reached my limit with Henrietta, daring to say such things even in Warren's absence. I had kept silent for Warren's sake until now, but I could no longer overlook such behavior. My husband Regan seemed to share my sentiment. At her utterly disrespectful attitude, we exchanged glances, nodded in agreement, and said to Henrietta, "Understood." Satisfied, she smiled and went back to Warren. Left behind, we felt suddenly very tired and sat down on the sofa. On the day of the housewarming party, we didn't go to Warren and his wife's home. We hadn't told Warren anything about the incident with Henrietta. Naturally, he must have thought we were coming. By now, Warren and his wife might be panicking. Sipping coffee with Regan at a cafe, I pondered this. Then Regan's mobile phone rang. He got up, answered the call, and stepped out of the cafe. I quickly paid the bill and followed him out, getting into the car. Regan switched the phone to speaker mode so I could hear Warren's voice too. "Dad, something strange is happening. All my relatives have suddenly got other plans, and you and Mom haven't arrived yet. Even Henrietta's relatives are canceling one after another. What's going on?" Feeling guilty about Warren's anxious tone but deciding to play dumb, we exchanged glances. Who knows what Henrietta's saying? Reagan asked, sounding casual. His acting was so natural that it surprised me. Noticing my reaction, Regan winked and gestured to keep it a secret. I had to stifle a laugh, covering my mouth. Henrietta is also confused. Oh, another call's coming in. I'll call back later. Be safe, coming over. Warren still seemed to expect our visit, making me feel remorseful. But I convinced myself it was necessary to get back at Henrietta. Then my mobile phone rang. It was a relative who was supposed to attend today's party. Feeling sorry but chatting for a bit, I was engaged in a long conversation with a talkative relative when Regan's phone rang again. It was Warren. Regan switched to speaker mode and answered, "Dad, I just spoke to Henrietta's mom. What's going on? If you can still come, please do right away." Warren's voice, sounding close to tears, made me feel a tightness in my chest. Regan looked at me with furrowed brows. After I nodded at Regan, he reassured Warren. "Understood. We'll be right there. Calm down." With that, Warren, sounding relieved, hung up. We who were at a cafe near Warren's new home drove towards his place. Upon arriving and ringing the doorbell, Warren rushed out to greet us. Behind him, Henrietta glared at us with furious eyes. Once inside, Warren ushered us to the living room, waiting for us to sit on the sofa. Eagerly, he asked, "I didn't expect you to arrive so soon. Where were you? What's going on?" All our relatives are angry. Henrietta's relatives are apologizing, and I have no idea what's happening. Calm down, Warren. First of all, congratulations on your new home. I'll explain everything now, I said to calm him down. I turned to Henrietta, who was silently sitting. You know why we're the only ones here, don't you, Henrietta? What do you mean? Henrietta feigned ignorance, prompting me to sigh lightly before starting. It seems you don't want us here, but given the current situation, your worries are gone, aren't they? Didn't want us here. What does that mean? Warren sounded confused. I smiled slightly and continued. Both your relatives and ours know everything now. Unfortunately, your plans have failed. You've already been reprimanded by your relatives, haven't you? A low growl unmistakably from Henrietta was heard. Ignoring this, I continued, looking straight at Henrietta. Given Warren's reaction now, you've been pretending to be good ever since you were dating him. Now that your true nature is exposed, why don't you just accept it? I didn't invite you. Her voice, now much quieter than before, made Warren lean in closer to hear her. She repeated, I didn't invite you. I told you not to come. Why did you come anyway and spread lies among the relatives, framing me? Is that fun for you? Taken aback by her intensity, Warren recoiled. I sighed at Henrietta, still insisting she was the victim. Mobile phones are so handy, aren't they, Henrietta? I nodded at Reagan. He took out his phone, operated it, and then looked at Warren. I just wanted to marry Warren because he's good-looking and earns decently. I don't want to deal with troublesome relatives. Anyway, elderly folks like you, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party. Henrietta's words from that day played from Regan's mobile phone. Henrietta turned pale and looked at Warren. After the playback, Warren turned slowly to Henrietta, his mouth agape. Henrietta tried to deny it, but what excuse could she give after that recording? The weather turned bad, so I cut my walk short and came back only to hear this incredible conversation. I couldn't help but record it. Glad it was useful, Regan said regretfully. Warren looked at me for confirmation, and I nodded firmly. I couldn't believe it at first either, Warren, but the truth is there in the recording. Henrietta's true feelings and her last words were said despite my presence. It's hard to escape now. Regan fixed his gaze on Henrietta, questioning how anyone could stay calm knowing she had been deceiving everyone since her dating days with Warren, let alone after their marriage. Seeing his look, Henrietta dropped her shoulders and ceased her struggle. This seemed like an affirmation to Warren, who abruptly stood up and left the house. It happened so suddenly that we couldn't stop him, and although Regan hurried after him, he soon returned. Apparently, Warren had driven off somewhere, leaving his mobile phone behind, making it impossible for us to call him. Henrietta, left behind and surrounded by us, sat trembling and pale, huddled up. As time passed helplessly, Warren eventually returned, holding something in his hand, which he slammed in front of Henrietta, saying quietly, "Sign the divorce papers and leave." Henrietta looked up at Warren, her mouth agape, but Warren repeated himself, took a pen from the holder on the table, and began to fill in his part. After finishing, he forced the pen into Henrietta's hand and tapped on the divorce papers. "Come on, sign, and leave." Overwhelmed, Henrietta, though frightened, filled in her part. She looked at Warren when finished, but he, without making eye contact, was checking for any missing details. Finding no errors, he forcefully made Henrietta stand up and dragged her to the front door. He then pushed Henrietta out of the house, ignoring her attempts to cling to him and throwing her bag outside. "It's late, so I'll submit this tomorrow. Don't ever come back to this property," he said, slamming the door shut and locking it. Henrietta's pleading voice could be heard from outside, but Warren ignored it and turned to apologize to us. "I'm sorry for the trouble. I had no idea she was like that." We could say nothing to his deep apology, just embracing him. Before long, Henrietta's voice faded away. We decided to stay at Warren's new home that night. The next morning, Warren submitted the divorce paper first thing, and his divorce from Henrietta was finalized. Concerned about his heartache, we chose to stay another night. And that evening, with a somewhat calmer Warren, we discussed everything that had happened. As we recounted the past events, Warren listened with clenched fists. Regan, who was also unaware of these details, placed his hand on my shoulder as I spoke. Then we revealed the truth about the current situation. After Henrietta had left, telling us not to come, I learned that Regan had spontaneously recorded the conversation. We decided together to inform Henrietta's parents. When we called and explained the situation, Henrietta's parents, initially in disbelief, changed their attitude and kept apologizing. After hearing the recorded audio, angry about their daughter's misdeeds, they intended to tell the relatives who had planned to attend the housewarming party not to go. After hanging up, we discussed and decided to do the same with our relatives. They too were furious and said they wouldn't attend. That is how the current situation unfolded. Hearing all this, Warren's shoulders drooped again, worried but unable to do anything. We decided to spend another night. The next day, Warren came into the living room, looking relieved, and shared what happened the previous night. He had apparently contacted his former in-laws. Henrietta was now at her parents' home, being disowned and facing eviction. They also planned to bring alimony, which would be imposed on Henrietta as her debt. While Warren felt this was not enough, he seemed more settled than expected. After returning home, we immediately started packing up our old house. Now dated, it was set to be handed over. The house was actually being remodeled for us to live in together. Since Warren was at work during the day, the renovations were to take place. Though costly to modify a newly built home, with some financial gain from the recent events and our help, the decision was made. While waiting for the house's remodeling, we were happily clearing out our old home.
I caught you cheating, Susan. I just returned from a business trip when my mother-in-law suddenly came at me with a triumphant grin, accusing me of infidelity. With no recollection whatsoever, I had no choice but to echo her words. She probably thought I was playing dumb, her voice growing stronger as she continued, closing in on a culprit. I had a hidden camera set up in the car. Lately, I've noticed some things left behind that don't belong to our family, men's belongings. Not just once, but several times. I've been suspecting that a man other than a family member has been riding in our car. That's why when you took the dash cam for repair, I was convinced you tried to cover up evidence under the guise of repair, didn't you? Then, she conveniently mentioned my recent business trip, alleging that I had been with an affair partner all this time, ensuring I wouldn't be caught on the dash cam. But unfortunately for me, she had her own camera set up. "I'm sure everything has been captured on it," she said. "There are 2 cars at my in-laws' house, and one of them was used by everyone living there, which included me. The car designated for everyone's use had an interior dash cam recording details of both road trips and inside the car. My mother-in-law, suspecting my infidelity, had it set up to gather evidence. When I sent it for repairs, she immediately assumed it was to conceal evidence. I was at a loss for words. Why did she suspect me to this extent and confidently assert that I was cheating? Most likely, it was because of my past job as a hostess at a lounge during my college days. My family wasn't wealthy, so I worked as a hostess to pay for my college tuition. My parents suggested I apply for student loans, but I declined. Working as a hostess provided flexible hours, mainly at night, allowing me to plan around my classes and other activities. Socializing with older men provided valuable learning experiences about economic structures and different industries, which proved useful in my current job. When I started dating my husband Mike, he knew about my past but didn't disclose it to his family, especially his conservative mother. However, during a visit to his parents before our marriage, his mother discovered my past job and erupted in outrage, demanding that Mike break up with me. Mike defended me, explaining that I only worked as a hostess serving drinks and having conversations, but his mother's reaction had already tainted her perception of me. I knew that, so why didn't you tell me? Mike sighed deeply. Because I knew this would happen. I was waiting for the right time to talk to you about it. How did you find out, anyway? With some hesitation, his mother replied in a faltering tone. Melissa started talking about how she wanted to work as a hostess to earn money. She apparently came across a top all-time popular hostesses article online and found Susan. Melissa is Mike's younger sister. She's into flashy things, has a tendency to change boyfriends frequently, and definitely fits the typical image of a hostess in general. So it's okay if your own daughter wants to become a hostess, but it's not okay for anyone else. As Mike spoke with a mixture of exasperation and disbelief, his mother's voice grew shrill. I never said it was okay for her. How rude. But you didn't scold her like this, did you? Wow, when you brought this woman here the first time, I thought she was a respectable young lady, and I was relieved. I didn't know she was a filthy woman. She deceived us. Susan is indeed very responsible. She worked as a hostess to pay for her tuition, not for mere leisure like Melissa. She didn't neglect her studies and quit right after she graduated. She even secured a position at a reputable company. Her performance at work was even better than mine. At these words, his mother clenched her lips in frustration while I was deeply moved. He stood up for me as I was being condemned, but I couldn't help but feel concerned about the deteriorating relationship between myself and the woman who could become my mother-in-law. Just as I was contemplating the challenges of marrying Mike despite my love for him, he surprised me with a proposal. But what about your mother? She would absolutely be against us getting married. Don't worry about her. My dad used to take his clients to lounges with hostess services for business, so he understands. He actually helped me convince my mom. Really? Absolutely. While I was skeptical, Mike was full of confidence. Despite my lingering anxiety, I chose to trust him and nodded in agreement. Our plan was to find a place for the two of us to live together after getting married. Mike, being the second son, always joked that if anyone should live with their parents, it should be the eldest son. His older brother wasn't married at the time but had a fiancée, so I naturally assumed they would be the ones to move in with my in-laws. But then we'd rather have Mike live with us. To my surprise, my mother-in-law, who had previously belittled and criticized me as the filthy woman, was the one who brought up such a proposition. I couldn't fathom her intentions, but since we had already pushed through with the marriage against her wishes, I couldn't refuse when Mike voiced his worries, asking if I was going to be okay. I confidently assured him that I was going to be fine. Shortly after our marriage, we began living in Mike's parents' house. Our newlywed life consisted of living together with my in-laws and sister-in-law. Melissa had actually gotten married a little before us, but her husband was immediately assigned to an overseas business trip, so she remained at her parents' house. Just like Mike said, my father-in-law was understanding and treated me kindly. It helped that I had experience conversing with older men, so our talks were quite engaging. My mother-in-law didn't seem to approve of that aspect of me either. She's just fooling you, dear. I could hear such backbiting quite frequently. She spread rumors in the neighborhood about me being filthy, and when she saw the designer items I had received during my days as a hostess, she would make snide remarks about my spending habits. At first, Mike and my father-in-law would scold her, but the shrewd woman eventually started to harass me when they weren't around. Hey, since you're so extravagant with your spending, you shouldn't be keeping money around. Just leave it all to me, and I'll manage it for you. She had the audacity to come to my room and say that, leaving me dumbfounded. I'm not wasting money. These designer items aren't recent purchases. Plus, if I were to entrust anyone with my money, it would be Mike. You're just deceiving Mike. Even if you gave it to him, you just pester him for money and end up spending it all. I should be the one to hold on to it. Besides, the other day, I witnessed you returning home after drinking with a man. You seem to have a penchant for men, don't you? That man happened to be my boss. If you work for a company, it's natural to occasionally socialize over drinks, isn't it? Always making excuses, she demanded. Just hand over your money to me. I was at a loss for words. But since I'm not someone who spends a lot of money in the first place, it wouldn't inconvenience me much even if I were to give her a portion of my salary. So, I replied, I guess I could give you about half of my salary, but remember, it's my money that you'll be managing, so don't use any of it. How could you say that? You were really rude. That's how I ended up giving half of my salary to my mother-in-law each month. She would come to my room to collect it, perhaps to keep it a secret from Mike and my father-in-law. Melissa, my sister-in-law, was more favorable towards me. She would approach me in a friendly manner and ask about my days as a hostess or seek advice on her friendships. I appreciated her friendliness, but it wasn't exactly comforting, given that she was far more reckless with her money than me but never got scolded for it. Plus, I noticed that she had been occasionally taking and using my personal belongings without permission. In the beginning, she quietly borrowed them and returned them, but eventually she stopped returning them. My mother-in-law's behavior was escalating as well. She would follow me. On my days off, whenever I interacted with a man, she would take photos, claiming them as evidence of infidelity. She'd share these photos with Mike and my father-in-law, insisting repeatedly that I was having an affair and should be kicked out. I want to trust you. Mike spoke to me with powerless words that seemed to contradict his true feelings, after being shown evidence of infidelity by my mother-in-law for who knows how many times. But the number of photos my mom brings to me, isn't it excessive? Have you been meeting men behind my back? No way, I interrupted him out of shock. Your mom takes photos of random people I bump into or people asking me for directions, strangers I absolutely don't know. Yeah, you're right, sorry. Mike's voice lacked energy and I didn't feel he fully believed me. Melissa would buy into everything my mother-in-law said, often commenting, whether maliciously or not, Susan, you really have a lot of men wrapped around your finger. That's amazing. Her words seemed to be taking a toll on Mike as well. My mother-in-law's boasts about having caught me red-handed came amidst this ongoing tension. I finally got definitive proof of Susan's infertility. With that, she summoned my father-in-law, Mike, and Melissa to watch the hidden camera footage with her. I knew everyone was suspicious of me due to my mother-in-law's outrageous behavior. Even Mike started to think I might be cheating, but just as strongly as my mother-in-law insisted on her evidence, I had absolute confidence that I hadn't done anything wrong. And at that moment, only, I knew about the shocking footage that was about to disappoint my mother-in-law's expectations greatly. My mother-in-law pressed the play button, and immediately the inside of a car was projected on the screen. Everyone except me held their breath. What appeared on screen was, in fact, Melissa indecently dressed and flirting with a man. That's right, I was the only one who knew about this. The man's belongings that did not belong to the family, as my mother-in-law had put it, were the belongings of Melissa's lover. What? Wait, what's going on? My mother-in-law spoke so fast and pressed the pause button on the remote several times, but perhaps due to her panicking, her fingers couldn't actually press the button, and the image of Melissa in disarray continued to play. Melissa's voice filled the room. Stop it. Turn it off, she cried out in a voice filled with anguish, on the verge of tears. Why? Why did this happen? But Melissa deleted all the footage from the dash cam. When I opened my mouth, everyone turned to look at me. Clearing my throat, I continued. Earlier, your mother didn't mention that this footage was from her hidden camera. You let your guard down because you thought you had deleted your own affair from the dash cam, leaving only mine. Melissa, with a look of despair, directed her gaze towards her mother. Why would she put a hidden camera? That's awful. It's like you're spying. If you wanted to capture Susan's infidelity, you should have at least told me about the camera. And why didn't you check what was being recorded? I can't believe this. Those words sparked anger on Mike's stunned face. What the heck? You're okay if Susan is the victim of a hidden camera, but not you? Cut the crap. It's okay, Mike. I said, and continued, you know, Melissa, dash cam data is usually stored on a memory card and can be recovered even after being deleted. The dash cam was acting up, and because I knew that you've been deleting things, I had it restored while it was being repaired. So, your fare is recorded on the dash cam too. Oh, and obviously, there's nothing of mine. I never cheated. Tears swelled up in Melissa's eyes as she stared at me. Why? Why would you do this to me? We were getting along so well. Normally, you don't just take things that belong to someone you're close to, do you? And didn't you, along with your mother, keep saying that I was having an affair? If it really was a relationship based on mutual respect, we wouldn't do such things to each other. It's only natural to be angry if someone does that. I didn't take anything without permission. Melissa passionately argued to the point of straining her voice, but such lies won't hold up. Yes, you have. I even have evidence. You didn't notice the hidden camera in my room that has been set up for a long time now, did you? Yes, for a long time. I could see my mother-in-law's body tense up at those words. A smile crept up on my face. Well, it looks like he finally figured it out. It's captured on camera, the day you came to my room and accused me of being extravagant with money, demanding that I hand over my salary. I even have footage that shows you coming to my room every month to collect the money. My mother-in-law's face turned deep red. That's because you squander your money. I was just holding on to it for you. So, where's all this money you've been holding on to for me? No rebuttal came. My mother-in-law's face remained red, and her teeth clenched in frustration. I know what you were up to. You've been following me every time I leave the house. But I've also been following you when you go out, and you know what? You've been going to male strip clubs, haven't you? Multiple times a week. You needed money for your addiction. My father-in-law finally spoke up. He looked at my mother-in-law intently, as if pleading with his eyes. She lowered her gaze. Well, it's true in a way. I may have gone there occasionally. But Susan, can we see the footage from your hidden camera? When my father-in-law spoke, my mother-in-law unleashed her words as if she had been struck. There's no need for that. Having a hidden camera in the first place is despicable. But you did the same, didn't you? Mike said with a sigh. Moreover, you were the one who placed hidden cameras in the car used by all of us and secretly followed and took photos of Susan. Susan only had a camera in her own room. Which do you think is more despicable? Once again, my mother-in-law seemed at a loss for words. I went to fetch the camera in my room with my father-in-law, and we checked the footage. There was Melissa stealing my belongings and my mother-in-law demanding money and coming to collect it. Everything was recorded. I am truly sorry. Once we finished watching the footage, my father-in-law apologized. Even when I told him it was okay, he wouldn't stop apologizing. Mike joined him and apologized to me as well. I screwed up. I should have stopped Mom from following you and taking photos. I let my own insecurities get the better of me. I'm sorry. He looked up with worried eyes and asked, Can I still be your husband, Susan? Of course you can. At my words, Mike finally smiled. My father-in-law demanded my mother-in-law to return the money to me and also served her with divorce papers. Despite her pleas of having no money and begging him not to leave her, my father-in-law was resolute, and they ultimately divorced. She's now working full-time in order to repay me and cover her living expenses. I'm sure she doesn't have any spare time to visit strip clubs anymore. Melissa was kicked out of the house, and her husband, who is still on his business trip abroad, left her as well. It didn't seem like she was particularly bothered by the divorce, perhaps because she had always been averse to being tied down by one man. On the other hand, what seemed to hit her hard was having to repay me for the numerous designer items she stole from me. She finally started working as a hostess, but not being particularly bright or street smart. She doesn't seem to be doing well. There's even talk of her turning into a sex worker to make ends meet. While I can't say for certain, it seems she's desperate to make money. As for me, I'm living happily with Mike and my father-in-law in his home. As expected, conversations with my father-in-law flowed smoothly, and my husband would often ask to join in, maybe because he was jokingly jealous of our relationship. The three of us laugh and enjoy